Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Planetarium stream, the last of these types of streams. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, since we've had some spectacular showings in the past month or so. I thought this was a good time to talk more about it, why it happens, why we have time periods where it is more active, and of course, give you some tips to help if you want to see them for yourself. I do see we already have a question in the comments, and that is something I will be getting to. If anyone else does have questions throughout the show, feel free to leave them in the comments. As you can see, I am working solo tonight, so it may take me a second to see questions when they come up, but I promise that I will make sure that I answer them before the end of our stream tonight. So with that, let me get it up and going. All right, so the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, as you may have also heard them called, are generally seen as this kind of mild glow in the sky. Some people describe them as these like dancing curtains of light, and they can have different colors, which we'll talk about the colors in a little bit. But in general, oops, here we go. In general, the aurora is seen around both the North and South poles. So what we're used to here is the aurora borealis. That's the aurora that forms around the North Pole. But there is also the aurora australis, which forms around the South Pole. And you can see here that the aurora forms kind of a ring around the pole. This ring is what we call the auroral zone, which is very difficult to say, but it's generally in roughly the same area, but it does kind of shift and change and grow and shrink depending on different conditions, which we'll talk more about. But that is why sometimes we can see them really well from here in Duluth, and sometimes we have to go much further north to be able to see them. Basically, you have to be in that auroral zone in order to be able to see them. All right, before we get into what specifically causes the aurora, I thought it would be fun to take a little look at some of the mythology behind it because there are some really cool cultural stories associated with the aurora, at least for cultures that saw the aurora. So the name Aurora Borealis actually has a Greek and Roman origins. The word aurora is derived from the name of the Roman goddess of the dawn. So Aurora traveled from east to west and announced the coming of the sun. And then Boreas means wind. So Aurora Borealis is like the northern wind that brings the lights, which is a pretty good way of describing it. One of my favorite kind of mythologies around the aurora is the Finnish story. Dealing with the firefox. So I'm going to show just a short little clip of this. I may not have it linked. I will make sure I link it before the end of the night. But it's a super cute story, and I want to show you just a portion of it. It's the tale of the firefox. It's so cute. Looking at a few other cultures, to the Chinese, the aurora weren't seen very often, but when they were, it was a very special occasion, and so they were seen as celestial battles between good and evil dragons, and whichever one would, of course, determine the course of things for the next while. And then the last one I want to point out is from the Inuits, who saw the aurora as the spirits of their ancestors playing a game in the sky. And I really love that one as well. All right, well, let's take a look at what is the cause of the aurora? Why do we see them? And really, in the simplest terms, it is because of our sun and the Earth's magnetic field. So let's start with the sun. The sun is a star, just like the stars we see up in our night sky. Since it's a star, it's a big ball of hot gas, mostly hydrogen and helium. But as you can see in these images of the sun, where we have blocked off the bright body of the sun and are just looking at the very dim outer atmosphere, we can see that there are streams of light coming off of the sun. Not only is this light, but these streams also carry with it charged particles, electrons, protons, that sort of thing. And sometimes these charged particles do actually flow out and away from the sun. We call the steady stream of charged particles coming from the sun the solar wind. And so it's constantly blowing out in all directions, the solar wind. Now, occasionally, the sun lets out a bit stronger of a wind, and we get more charged particles coming out. And then sometimes we have other activity like solar flares. So solar flares occur when we have these loops of gas, which are called a prominence. If that loop stretches too far, it will snap, just like if you stretch a rubber band. And when it snaps, it sends all of these charged particles that are trapped in the loop, it flings them out into space in what we call a solar flare. And so with this, you get a lot of extra stuff being flung away from the sun out into space. And the most massive of these are what we call coronal mass ejections, which is just a very, very, very big, intense flare. You can kind of think of it that way. Now, sometimes those flares and coronal mass ejections fling stuff our way, in addition to the solar wind that's already being blown out our way. Oh yeah, here's a coronal mass ejection. I forgot that I had a video of it. So you can see just how much bigger and more intense these events are. So, from the solar wind and the occasional solar flare and even more rare coronal mass ejections, the sun is flinging lots of charged particles out into space, and some of those head to us. Now, on the Earth, we have a magnetic field. The Earth, you can kind of think of it as a giant bar magnet sitting in the center of the Earth. And so it kind of envelops us in this magnetic field, which is a really good thing because that magnetic field actually protects us from all of those charged particles being flung by the sun. Without that magnetic field, these charged particles would actually hit our atmosphere and strip our atmosphere away. So it's a very good thing that we have this. We like it. So the magnetic field, what it does is it kind of deflects the solar wind and particles, charged particles from solar flares and coronal mass ejections. It deflects these around the Earth so that we don't get hit by most of it. But not all of it gets deflected. Some of the charged particles do make it through, and when they do, they end up following the magnetic field down to either the north or south magnetic pole, which is pretty close to lined up with the north and south rotation pole of the Earth. And so they follow the magnetic field down to there, where they then hit the atmosphere around either the north or the south pole. Now, when the charged particles hit the gases in our atmosphere, they knock electrons in the gases in our atmosphere. They give them some extra energy. Electrons don't like that. They want to have the least amount of energy possible, so they will give up that energy again. And one way of giving up that energy is to emit light. So when those charged particles from the sun hit the atmosphere, they excite the electrons, and the electrons emit light to give up that extra energy. Now, the exact type of light, the color of light, depends on what type of atom the electron is a part of. And that's where we get all of the different colors. So, in general, let me see if I have it here. Yes. The red color that we see comes from oxygen atoms high up in the atmosphere. A bit lower in the atmosphere, the oxygen is a bit denser, and so we actually see it glow more green instead of red. And then we can also get some blues from nitrogen. And nitrogen we can get a little bit of red from too. But essentially those are our three colors. We have reds and greens coming from oxygen and blues coming from nitrogen. And you can even see in this picture of the aurora here taken from the International Space Station, we've got our kind of reds above and greens below. As that oxygen gets denser, we see more of a green coming from those electrons. And of course, when you have the blue mixed in, that's where you can get kind of your pinks and your purples in there as well. So very simply, that's the cause of our aurora. Charged particles come from the sun. Some of them make it through our magnetic field where they're funneled down to either Earth's north or south pole, where they hit the atmosphere, excite those gases, and cause the gases to glow. As a kind of another way of thinking about it, this is the same way a neon sign works. You cause the gas in the neon light to get excited and it glows. Same thing's happening in our atmosphere. So the reason that our aurora can become more intense is when we have more of those charged particles coming our way, we get hit by more of them, and that causes more light to be emitted, and so you get a stronger, brighter aurora. And that's what can cause the shift in the size and the position in those auroral zones, and why you may have some areas that see it less frequently than others. All right, before we talk a little bit more about how to actually see the aurora, excuse me, I figured it would be a fun detour to take a look at some other planets, because Earth is not the only planet in our solar system to have aurora. As you can see here, both Jupiter and Saturn also exhibit aurora. Theirs is caused pretty much by the exact same thing, because they both also have a magnetic field. So charged particles from the sun get funneled to their poles where they hit the gases in their atmosphere and cause them to glow. Now there is a slight difference between theirs and ours. Their magnetic field is a lot stronger. And so those charged particles from the sun actually get accelerated. They get kind of shot down at the atmosphere much quicker than they do here at the Earth. So they hit the atmosphere with more energy, which causes the light of the aurora to glow more in the ultraviolet rather than in visible light like ours does. So what we're seeing here is not what you would actually see on the planet. The glow of the aurora is actually seen in ultraviolet. So we would not be able to see it with our eyes, but we're kind of overlaying on this visible light image where the aurora is and what it would look like. Uranus and Neptune do also exhibit aurora, but theirs is a little bit more weird. You can see here on Uranus, we have kind of these two little spots that are the aurora, and you can see the auroral kind of spot here. And over here as Uranus rotates. We're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on with Uranus and Neptune, especially Uranus. Its magnetic field is not lined up with the north and south rotation pole like pretty much every other planet in our solar system. It's very, very skewed off axis, and we're not quite sure why, but that does seem to create these very different looking aurora than we see on Earth or on Jupiter or Saturn. Okay, Venus does kind of have an aurora. It doesn't have a magnetic field like Earth does. Um, and so that solar wind just kind of hits the atmosphere full on, which creates kind of a whole planet aurora rather than an aurora around just the poles. But as I said, because it doesn't have a magnetic field, that does mean its atmosphere is slowly being stripped away. So while it is kind of cool that you could see an aurora anywhere on the planet of Venus, that comes at the consequence of it slowly losing its atmosphere. Um, what was this? Oh, we also found it on Mars, which was very weird because Mars doesn't have a magnetic field and it doesn't have much of an atmosphere either. And you can see here that we found it at some very just localized places that kind of change. It seems to be more from magnetic rocks kind of attracting stuff. If I'm sounding very uncertain, it's because I am, because this is something we truly do not understand yet. But weirdly, we do see a type of aurora on Mars. It's very weird, and we don't know about it yet. Okay, back to Earth. When can you see the aurora? Well, if you are able to be anywhere in the auroral zone, you will see it. A lot of people have the misconception that aurora can only be seen in the winter, and that's not true. You can see it all year round. Typically, you get this idea because a lot of pictures of the aurora, like you're seeing here, have snow. That's because the auroral zone tends to hang out around the North and South Pole, where there is snow and ice on the ground for the majority of the year. We also have the benefit in the winter of having longer nights, which gives you a longer period of time to be able to see the aurora. So there are some benefits to winter, but you can see them all year round. There's not a specific season necessarily where you will see the aurora better. So what you want to do is you want to find yourself around the auroral zone, which typically stays kind of around the North and South Pole, like I've said, but occasionally does come down, allowing you to see them from lower latitudes than you would any day. So if you want a guaranteed seeing the aurora, you're going to want to travel to a location that stays in that auroral zone pretty much all the time. Then you'd have a very good chance. Um, For anyone else who can't travel or lives in areas where you tend to see it when the aurora becomes a bit stronger, a bit more active, you can somewhat plan a good time frame. You can't tell exactly when it's going to happen, but the sun does have a cycle that it goes through, an activity cycle that lasts about 11 years. During this 11-year cycle, the sun goes from having very little activity, so very few flares and coronal mass ejections, the things that kind of amplify the aurora. And then over the 11 years, it kind of ramps up and has more and more activity. We get more and more flares, which leads to more active aurora, before slowing back down again. Now we are actually heading into solar maximum, the time when the sun is going to be the most active. That is expected to happen in, I believe, 2025. So we should see more and more really strong, bright aurora over the next several years, which does give you a higher probability of being able to see it at locations like here in Duluth. Yeah, that's just the solar cycle. Okay, so let's say you're in a location, you want to know what are my chances of seeing the aurora? Well, there are a lot of different apps and websites that can give you aurora predictions. We typically can't give good predictions more than about a day or two out because it is highly dependent on the sun, and space weather is not something that's easy to predict. One good thing, though, is when a big flare does happen, the light reaches us before the charged particles. We get about a day and a half warning. So we do get a little bit of a heads up. Hey, a flare happened. It's heading towards us. There's a good chance the aurora is going to be really intense in a couple nights. And that can help you plan out some trips. But really, what you want to look for, and what you'll see on a lot of these forecasting sites, is the KP index. And this ranges from 0 to 9, and it's basically a ranking of how active the aurora is. To really be able to see it well, especially in a location like Duluth, we need that KP index to be at least a 4, ideally a 5 or a 6. And that's where we're going to get good shows even from here. Anything other than that, you're going to need to go further up north to be able to catch those. So as I said, there are lots of sites that you can look at. Spaceweather.com is one, the NOAA has one. AstroBob also tends to put out a advance notice that the aurora is going to be more intense if we know it's going to happen in our area. This is one of my personal favorite things. This is a free app for your phone called Aurora. And if you turn on the GPS locator, it will actually send you notifications when the KP index is going up and it looks like you have a good chance where you are to see it. So I'll often get alerts that say, hey, if you have clear skies, you should head out. You can probably see the aurora. So you can get those real-time alerts to let you know that you should go out, which I think answers the question we had. Yes. Okay. So around here, where do you need to go? Well, with the last big intense storm that we had, we could see them from right here in Duluth. Some really good places to try and get a little bit out away from the city lights, going down to either Brighton Beach, up to Hawk Ridge. I think the one back in March, was it March? Yeah, it was March. Sorry, I'm looking over at my husband because he was out with me. I think it was the one in March. We went about 20 minutes out of Duluth and just pulled off on one of those viewing areas, and we're able to see it beautifully. If you want more of a chance, you're going to want to head further up north, so places like Grand Marais, up the Gunflint, International Falls. I have also heard that you can see it down in the Twin Cities when the aurora is active enough that it comes down to that part of the state. Again, you just have to get out of the city lights to be able to see them. A couple things to keep in mind though, when you see the aurora with your eye, it may not look as vibrant and colorful as you see them in pictures. And that's because our eyes are not quite as sensitive to light as, say, a camera is. Cameras are able to keep that exposure open for longer than your eye stays exposed. And so it's able to pick up on those colors better than your eye can. So when you see them, it may look more grayish. You may see a tinge of color. The really big aurora we had back in March, I mean, we pretty much saw it as gray. You could see it moving in real time, which was something that I was always a little, questioned what it would look like, how fast it would move, but you could really see it moving and dancing in the sky. But it was definitely more of a gray color. And then when we took pictures with our phones, we were able to see more of the greens and the reds than we could see with our eye. That doesn't make it any less spectacular. Honestly, it was still the most incredible thing I've ever seen. That one back in March was my first time ever seeing the aurora. I'm so happy I can do the show and now finally say that I've seen them, because that hasn't been the case until now. So yeah, just to keep in mind that it's not going to look this vibrant colors, most likely to your eye as you see in pictures or you might see on your camera, but it's still a really cool show. This is just another example of that, and this I think does a really good kind of comparison of what we saw. You can see kind of more of the grayish with maybe a tinge of color, but your camera is definitely going to pick up more on that color. Now, if you're in the Duluth area or up towards Grand Marais, we have a wonderful tool for you. We have an all-sky camera set up on the roof of the museum of the Chickawauk Museum and Nature Center. And it runs every night. And so you can actually hop onto the website, which is right here, to take a look at the view from the camera and see, what the aurora is looking like. If it's looking good, then you could use that as now's a good time to go out and check it out for myself. Unfortunately, and I'm very sad about this, we also have a Facebook page for the camera. We're having some technical difficulties. One of our electronics has failed. We think just after a few years of being constantly exposed to the elements, we are in the process of getting it replaced, and we'll have it back up and running as soon as possible. But if you follow the camera on Facebook, we will put out an announcement when the camera is back active again. That should happen hopefully in the next couple weeks. We're just waiting to get this piece that we need to replace in and replaced. But to show you kind of what the all-sky camera can do, this is its video from the night that we had that active aurora back in March. And it's just... So this is sped up a little bit. You're getting about 10 minutes per second of video. But again, I was out that night for this, and you could see it moving. You may not always see it moving, but when it is very active, you will see it moving. And this one was spectacular. We had it not just like over the north, it was fully overhead in all directions. It was incredible. And we should expect to see more and more events like this over the next several years as the sun goes up into its maximum in its activity cycle. Um, yes, someone did comment that there are some really great Facebook groups for aurora and what we call aurora hunters, people who actively go out to see the aurora as much as possible. And I can vouch for one of the groups that they have. Which one am I a part of? I'm part of the Great Lakes Aurora Hunters, I believe, is the group that I'm in. They're fantastic. So much just camaraderie, help if you need it. There's a lot of, hey, I'm in this location and I can see the lights, so that you can kind of get a good sense of your location if you can see them. They also post all their pictures, which is just beautiful pictures. So I highly recommend joining, especially if you are in the Great Lakes region. There are a couple of Facebook groups for that, and you could probably find one for your area even if you're not around the Great Lakes. So that's another really good resource as well. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, that concludes our show on the aurora. So unfortunately, I can't tell you this is how you can forecast exactly what's going to happen each night, because we just can't do that. I can tell you the probability of aurora is going to be very high over the next several years, where we're going to have more episodes of very intense active auroras. When exactly that's going to be, I can't tell you, unfortunately. But you have these resources now to look for. You kind of know the things to look out for: solar flares, checking out some of these apps or sites that I mentioned to look at some predictions, so that hopefully you will be able to catch one next time they happen. And again, if you're in the Duluth area, definitely make sure you're following Astro Bob. Bob King, because he always puts out an alert for the area, and we try and share those whenever they happen as well. So yeah. Let's see. I am seeing some questions, so let me check out here. Is there a certain time frame when they can appear? Honestly, they can happen anytime. Any time of year, any time of the night, they can happen. Which is also why it's so difficult to say, if you want to plan a trip for this time period because it's just uncertain. It's really uncertain. Unless you, like I said at the beginning, go to one of those locations like Iceland that is in the auroral zone all the time, then you have a pretty good chance of seeing them just about any night. But for places like here in Duluth, it's not as clear cut, not as easy to say this is when it's going to happen. Is there a purpose for the aurora? No, no purpose. It's just a side effect of our atmosphere being hit by charged particles from the sun. It's just a cool side effect of natural phenomenon going on. It took the curtains off your. I like that. That's fantastic. I will say that was one of many draws that brought me to the job here. I'm from South Carolina. Um, and during my interview, I had one of the people interviewing me tell me about how he just can sit out on his back porch and see the aurora. And I was like, you may have just sold me with that statement right there. um, Okay, I think that's all of the questions. So that brings me to the bittersweet part of or bittersweet into our show. This is the last of this type of stream that we will be doing, but streams are not over. So starting in June, so starting on June 7th, we are introducing a new series called Wonderstruck Wednesdays, where we are going to be once again offering free planetarium shows at the planetarium. But we will also be streaming those shows as well. So they will look a little bit different and they will be presented at the planetarium with a live audience there. So we will be balancing both answering questions from people in person and also answering questions from people online. But we will continue to stream. We've got it worked out. We still have one audio bug, but that shouldn't stop us. So they will continue. It'll just look a little bit different because we will be doing it from the dome instead of my home computer, which is where I've been streaming from for the past 3 years. So they will continue. It's just going to look a little bit different. But if you're in the Duluth area, free shows on Wednesdays starting in June. We're very excited to offer those back again. Um, I'm glad I'm seeing happy reactions in the comments. I told you guys I didn't want to just completely abandon you. We love our little Facebook group, and we want to keep streaming to you guys too. It just was time to make a slight change for these, and also I will not be leading all of them anymore, which is another part of it. But yes, they will be continuing. We will still have our streams going. All right. So I have a couple more minutes for any last questions. Go ahead and leave those in the comments. Let me also show you our schedule for the upcoming week. On Friday, we're doing Expedition Moons. Saturday, we are doing Cosmic Colors at 2, and at 7 p.m. is the Hot and Energetic Universe. That is the last weekend that we will be showing these two shows. For now, we'll switch to 2 different shows for Saturdays in June. So these 2 will come back, but it will be a little while before they're back. So if you haven't seen them yet and you want to see them now, this weekend's your time to do it. And then next Wednesday, we are taking off to finalize our switch to the Wonderstruck series. And so we will be starting that back the first Wednesday of June. So the next Wednesday show will be on June 7th. And that is that. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we will wrap it up there. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us. This has been such a fun time. And we're not ending. We're not ending. It's just going to look a little bit different from here on out. But if you're in the area, definitely come see us on Wednesdays. You can also still catch us here on Facebook Live, and we will also still record these and post them to our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.